Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to get started because it's 12:30. Happy Friday to everybody if you're watching live. My name is Katie Jacobs. I work with HR leaders at the CIPD, and I've been hosting our coronavirus webinar series. Really looking forward to this one this afternoon. We're going to be discussing a really important topic: how you as HR professionals can look after the well-being of yourselves and your teams. Joining me to discuss this and to offer some advice and guidance, got a really great panel. We'll have David D'Souza, Membership Director of the CIPD, Gemma Dale, Wellbeing Manager at the University of Manchester and a lecturer at the Business School at Liverpool John Moores University, and Emma Cook, Director of Purely Balanced, who specialises in the importance of sleep. I'd like to thank them all for giving up their time to join us today. Before we get started on the content, as ever, some quick housekeeping. The session is being recorded. It will be available on demand via the webinar section of the CIPD website from this afternoon. You can also access recording of our previous webinars there, where we're looking at things like furlough, well-being, and leadership and communications, and you can sign up for future sessions. This coming Monday, we're going to be looking at supporting people managers, and then on Thursday, we'll be exploring how COVID-19 is changing the reward and benefits landscape. And I'll remind you about those at the end of the session as well. Secondly, if you want to submit questions during the webinar, please use the Q&A tab, which you can find at the bottom of your screen. Please don't use the chat box because we won't be monitoring that for questions. Attendees are muted, so any questions will need to be submitted via typing. And to flag that we have had a few in advance, so I'm going to answer those, try and get those answered as well. For legal advice, CIPD members can call our HR Inform helpline. That's available 24/7 and you'll get an individual response. And a reminder that we're updating the FAQs and resources on our website all the time as new information becomes available. You can head to the CIPD Coronavirus Hub for more. And finally, I'd like to flag a really exciting new benefit, our new Wellbeing Hub and Helpline for members in the UK and Ireland. Together with award-winning workplace wellbeing provider Health Assured, we're now providing members with free help and support 24/7 and 365 days a year via telephone or online consultation with qualified therapist, offering a structured way to work through physical or mental health issues and any financial difficulty you may be facing. Members can access the phone number and the online services via our membership benefits webpage. You'll see more details about this at the end of the session, and I'll give a reminder. So, onto the topic for this afternoon. We know how hard you're all working right now. From navigating furlough to supporting the health and well-being of home workers, people professionals have probably never worked harder than during the current coronavirus crisis. According to a Spot CIPD poll we did the other day, 2/3 of people professionals are working longer hours at the moment. I've been having lots of conversations with HR directors, and one CPO recently told me he feels like his team has packed a year's worth of work into a few weeks. Another one's team is regularly pulling 16 or even 18-hour days. Sound familiar? This afternoon, we're going to offer some practical hints and tips to help you take care of yourselves and your teams, to help you switch off, create boundaries, and get some much needed rest. I'll just take you quickly through our running order. First up, David will set a little bit of context and discuss the importance of prioritising well-being for people professionals during times of crisis. Then Gemma is going to talk about how to approach self-care and share her insight into how to keep HR teams healthy and engaged. And last but not least, Emma will share some practical strategies to help you get a good night's sleep. And then we'll open it up to questions. So that's it from me for now, and I'm going to hand over to David.
Hello, sorry, I just had to dash off to let the cat out of the kitchen. It was trapped because we're working a very different way. Just to clarify for everyone, I'm not actually, this is normally what the CIPD office looks like, and I'm not there. I'm using it as a background so you don't have to put up with my kitchen. But I do hope that you'll stay with us for the next hour, if only to hear Katie say award-winning workplace wellbeing provider one more time. There's no pressure, it's fine. Look, when I started my career many moons ago now, I remember getting taken to one side by my HR manager, or there would have been a personnel manager, if that ages it enough for some of the people kind of on today's webinar. And they said, look, there's only ever 3 things going on in your life: health, wealth, and your family and loved ones. And as long as 2 of those 3 things are okay, you can probably cope. And what we're dealing with at the moment is something that's attacking all three fronts almost at once, giving people issues around the health of them and their kind of loved ones and concerns around that, genuinely giving people concerns around their financial security, and also impacting family and the people that we care about. It's almost impossible to be isolated from the impacts of what's happening at the moment, even if people are having to isolate from what's kind of the virus itself. So it's difficult to give a context to something like this without being unduly downbeat. And that's because it is something that can be completely overwhelming. And so what we're hoping to do today is give you some tips and guidance to make sure that you are looking after yourself at an incredibly, incredibly challenging time. Katie mentioned that some of you will be working harder than you've ever been before, but I'm also aware that some of you just won't be working at all. You'll be furloughed, you'll be waiting to find out what's happening with your organizations, and the number of different sources of stress and tension in your lives. It's probably never been greater. And that's why I'm really glad that we've got some practical advice and support for you today, because the amount of different scenarios that we're facing into very rapidly, both inside of work and outside of work. I don't want to use the word unprecedented, but we probably haven't seen this before in most of our lives. So if you're working in HR, it could be that you're having to make decisions that you've never made before. It could be that you are facing situations that you've never made before, but also the way that we then have to message those decisions under pressure and under time pressure is something that most of us will have never had to face before. And at the very best of times, HR suffers from that kind of issue of cobbler's children not being looked after properly. And we see that in the way that quite often we invest in our own professionalism or learning and development opportunities. And certainly we're seeing it now as well, in that people are expecting to have to step up. They're expecting to be the source of everyone's concerns and their problems, a font of all legal knowledge on some issues that we've never had to face before, where actually the guidance has been sketchy and hastily put together, which is understandable, but that's been challenging. So it's a natural time, I hope, for people to pause and start thinking about themselves, as well as the people that they serve and support. And that's why today is really important, but also because the challenge that we have coming ahead over the next few months will be probably equally as demanding. I think we've reached a normal sort of status in lockdown very, very rapidly for many organisations, but you still have people operating on the front line and people supporting them. But for many people, the next challenge that we'll face is helping people to get back to the workplace, or understanding that they won't be able to, and dealing with all of the challenges that come with that. And actually all of that tension that you'll have between employers and employees, quite possibly, about what's an acceptable level of risk and how does that work in the working environment. So things are probably going to get more complex before they get any simpler. And that means that you need to look after yourselves better than you ever have done before, and think about the mental impact of not just what's happening in work, but everything that's happening outside of work as well. Because for every HR practitioner dealing with the challenges that they have in work, there'll be another one who genuinely does face challenges with family or friends, or the changing situation outside of it. Because it's very easy to forget that whilst we're called human resources, we as a function and as a profession are almost exclusively human beings. And that means that we have the same choices, the same difficulties and the same emotions, and the same finite amount of energy as anyone else. So Katie mentioned the Wellbeing Helpline prior, and that area that we've created for members. And I'm going to mention it again, because actually we don't want you to have to use that. We really don't, because we don't want people to be in that situation. But if you do need it, we want you to know that the support's there, as it is from the community that you have around you. So I'm glad that we got Emma and Jen to take you through the rest of the session, and I'll chip in again at the end. But I suppose from us as your professional body, you need to take care of yourselves, and we understand the challenges that you're facing in a number of dimensions, but take care of yourselves and each other. And I hope you genuinely take some practical things away from today's webinar.
Thank you so much for that, David. I'm going to pass over to Gemma Dale now, who's going to offer some kind of practical strategies and advice about working well in HR and how we can practice self-care in times of immense stress. So over to you, Gemma.
Thank you, Katie. what I'd like to start by saying is when you talk about well-being for a living, very often what you're actually doing is telling people things they already know. I'm guessing the people on this call, if I said to you now, what are the amounts of fruit and veg you're supposed to eat a day, the steps you're supposed to do, the water you're supposed to drink, however evidence-based they may be, you'd know the answer to much of it. Because when it comes to well-being, often what we don't have is a knowledge gap. We have a doing gap. And within that not doing are lots of things. And often I think as human resources professionals, as David's already alluded to, we're often busy, we're often putting other people first, and possibly even more so in the current situation. The slide that you can see in front of you now says, what is well-being? And it's a really difficult question to answer. And to be honest, there is no one single answer to that. It is very unique and it is very personal. There's been ideas about what is well-being as far back as Aristotle, and we have academic definitions of it. We have definitions that are in everyday language. And I do want to come in a moment to a definition I particularly want to share with you. But in terms of today, some of the things I'm going to try and share, some of the practical things I'm going to try and share, will not necessarily be new to you. Some of them may not work because well-being is so unique, so personal. What is good for my well-being or what detracts from it will be different to you, every single person on this call. So what I would say is when we get into sharing those tips and we see some information from Emma later today, it's really about looking at what might work for you, trying things and discarding what doesn't work. So I said there's lots of definitions of well-being, and I'm not going to take you through lots of those, but I do want to come to one particular definition. If I can have the next slide, please. And because of this challenge with really defining what do we mean when we talk about well-being, and so there are many, many different definitions. The CIPD have one on workplace well-being, but this is one that I've come back to personally a number of times in the last few weeks, and this is from a 2012 academic paper for some writers who tried to come up with a definition of well-being that would work both in a kind of academic and a layperson context. And what they defined well-being as was a balance point between somebody's individual resource pool and the challenges that they're facing every day. And we often see this idea of balance when we talk about well-being. Often we use the term work-life balance. But I think this particular diagram is a really interesting one, because when we look at resources and challenges now, for many of us, that balance has changed completely in the last few weeks and months. So what does this tell us? This tells us in this theory that when we have well-being, we have personal well-being, when our resources and our challenges are aligned. And actually for many of us at the moment, our challenges are significant and our resources are depleted. Many of you will be balancing care for others, child homeschooling, all sorts of practical things. Even in recent weeks, things like, can we get the basic provisions that we really need? So my reason really for sharing this slide with you today was to encourage you to think about where is your current level of balance and where is your current well-being, because self-care starts with self-awareness. So what I'm going to do in a moment is try and share some practical tips with you, things that you can try to help you just boost and enable your well-being at the current time. But first, and if I can have the next slide, I wanted to just reflect on, well, why is our job so challenging? Well, when I talk to HR professionals in more normal times, if I can use that phrase, this is the stuff that we often get involved in. And this is the stuff that can come with a real high emotional load. We support individuals and we support managers. Many people on this call will be familiar with all of these kinds of things. And these can be challenging at the best of times. But if we move on, we know that we've got a whole range of other particular challenges at this moment, and David and Katie have already alluded to some of these. If we can move to the next slide, many of you will also be dealing with these things. So furloughing, and that was, as anybody that's close to that will know, is extremely complicated, and we've had legal update after legal update. helping people to work remotely practically, adapting all our policies, adapting our strategies. And some of us will, without doubt, be thinking about what does this mean in the longer term, the practical return to work, but also the potential that we may need to cut costs. And what does all of that mean as well? And I know some people are already thinking about the big implications in the longer term. But we are already seeing from early research some of the challenges that are on your screen now. There's been some early research from academics at the University of Manchester, from the Institute of Employment Studies, and I will tweet some of these out after the session so that people can see them if they're interested. But we know these are some of the things that are coming through already. So these will be coming through for our people, and there may be things as HR professionals you are also experiencing. So we're going to talk about sleep in a moment or two, but things like anxiety, being distracted, early indications that people are taking less exercise or their diet has reduced, or even they're drinking more, musculoskeletal issues, because lots of us are working sort of in kitchens and dining rooms and in a kind of slightly suboptimal sort of way, but people feeling anxious and overwhelmed. There is a real challenge coming towards us as HR professionals. The potential mental health impacts of what we are experiencing are going to potentially be severe and long term. What I am going to say is that the suggestions I'm going to come on to in a little while will be about boosting and enabling your well-being. They're not about supporting people who are experiencing a mental health crisis. And I do want to say, if you are struggling, if you are experiencing some of these issues and you need more help, please reach out. The CIPD have already released some amazing resources. The NHS is still open. Your organisations may also have EAPs or counselling services. So please do seek support for your mental health if you need it. So if I can come on now to a few of my tips for just supporting and enabling your well-being. Sleep, we're going to talk about that in a lot more depth, but sleep is absolutely critical to good health and well-being. I'm also going to come on to now those things that I said to you that fall into the category of stuff that you know, but sometimes we need a reminder of it. And sometimes what we also do is we know these things are important, but we deprioritize it. So what I would like to do, as I said before, is just invite you to perhaps reprioritize some of those things for yourself that we know are good for us. So food, making healthy food choices. Seen plenty of jokes on social media about people spending lots of their time in lockdown peering into the kitchen cupboards or peering into the fridge. I have personally spent far too much time in the biscuit tin in recent weeks, but making good food choices and good exercise choices are really important. We're all allowed out for our daily exercise, whether you run or whether you cycle, or whether you're just doing something in your own home. It's really important to try and keep up that physical activity. If you can and your situations allow it, get outside for that. Just being in nature for small periods of time, just like walking through a park, makes a really big difference. And I also want to talk about rest and breaks. There's loads of good advice around about how to work successfully from home. Unfortunately, lots of it were written for a pre-pandemic world, and lots of it was written assuming that you're not necessarily looking after children at the same time. But that idea around try and have start and end times, try and take a regular break, try and have a different place for your work and your home life. Might be possible for some people, not possible for everybody, but where you can, building in that rest and trying to keep some real boundaries between work and home. I mentioned before that some people are feeling very overwhelmed by the current situation. Lots of people, when I talk about well-being, one of their reasons for not focusing on well-being is they don't have time. And sometimes, certainly when I'm doing personal training work, that really means I don't actually want to, or I'm not prepared to prioritize this. Some people right now will have more time. Perhaps they're on furlough leave, or perhaps the amount of work that they've got has been impacted. Others will be experiencing a whole range of different reasons why they are more busy than they ever have been. What I would say is there's always room for 5 deep breaths. The other thing that I would encourage you to do is something like a guided meditation. It's another great way, if you're feeling anxious or stressed or overwhelmed, to just bring that down slightly. I'd also encourage you, if you can, to try and find some me time. Now, I know that is a really, really big ask at the moment. But you know what? We're spending lots of time right now with our partners and with our children, and we might love them, but we're not used to spending 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with them. So this might involve some negotiation, or it might involve some real strong prioritization. But if you can find a little time for you, go and have a bath, go and read a book in your room, in a different room for 20 minutes, do your exercise alone rather than taking the kids. If that's an option for you, if you can share that with a partner, just try a couple of times a week and carve out a little bit of time for you. The coffee on the screen you can see now represents connection. Lots of us are used to that face-to-face, and it's not available to us in the same quantities at the moment, but it's also connection with friends, family, colleagues is really important for well-being. Lots of us are replicating that at the moment with family Zooms, family quizzes, all these kind of things. They're great. They can be really beneficial, but I'd also caution you, because they can contribute to overwhelm. So if you need to say no to one additional connection, because there's a cognitive load as well, with lots and lots of face-to-face meetings, inviting somebody into your own home. So we need connection, but we need connection with balance. And the final picture on there is around gratitude and positive psychology. I'll tweet a really great lecture example out on that after the session from a good friend of mine, Sue Pabiel. But actually placing deliberate emphasis on what is still good, what is still positive, and all the things that you've got to look forward to. It's a real positive thing to do right now, and will boost our well-being and mental health. I'm doing a really nice activity with my family at the moment. We're all keeping a little jar of all the things that we love and we want to do again. And every time we say, I can't wait to do this, when lockdown ends and we return to a more typical situation, we're just putting it on a post-it note and putting it in that jar, and that's going to be our post-pandemic bucket list. So just doing those little things and placing that positive emphasis is what I would encourage everybody to try and do. A simple exercise like, what are the 3 good things I'm grateful for today, can make a real difference. And then finally, if I can have my next slide, a couple of final messages if I can. As a good friend of mine often says, go gently with yourself, be kind to yourself, cut yourself some slack. This might actually not be the moment to take up a new hobby, learn a new language, or do all of those things that you've been thinking about doing for the last 5 years or so. Literally, go gently in the world and in your life. Prioritize your self-care. It's absolutely important. I know it's become a bit of a cliche to say it, but you can't be there to support other people if you're struggling. So prioritizing yourself, creating those little spaces for you are critical. And please please feel free to say no when you need to, if something is not going to serve you well in the current time. As I often say to my coachees, no is a complete sentence. And if I could just have my final slide. Right now, what we're experiencing feels huge. It feels overwhelming, and the uncertainty not knowing where it's going to end is a real challenge for some people. And we know that, and the early research is telling us that. But I would simply ask everybody at this time to remember that this will pass. This will end. There are better times to come. We will be reunited with our friends and our family. So thank you for listening to me today. Wherever you are, stay safe and stay well. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Jem. That was brilliant. I think that teed up our next speaker really nicely as well, because you touched on the importance of getting a good night's sleep. So without further ado, I will pass over to Emma, who's going to talk through that in some detail. Emma.
Hi everyone. First off, Gemma, well done. I couldn't help but agree with all them things there. So just to everyone on the line here, okay, so I'm Emma Cook, the director and founder of Purely Balanced, and I've built a company that believes in self-care, preventing healthcare, quite literally. If you just stop and take 5 minutes to yourself, as Gemma said, it just makes the world of difference. Now, the background that we've got to what I'm about to go through is I've got over a decade worth of research behind me on how we do what we do, why we do what we do, and how We are evolving in a technologically advancing world, but we still have our human needs underneath. And I once did a session for you guys for CIPD, and we called it putting the human back in human resources. And I think at this point in time, that's super important, because at the end of the day, you guys have had a whirlwind of stuff that has landed on your shoulders and on your desks, be that whether you are still working or, as we said, whether you are furloughed. Now, the reason why we put the emphasis on getting a good night's sleep is because sleep is the foundation to health and well-being. If you start to fix your sleeping pattern, your body will naturally start to reset itself. They are proving time and time again that sleep also helps boost your immune system. So not only at this current point in this pandemic is it vital that you start to pay attention to the way that you sleep in, it also helps balance your hormones, and it helps balance the hormone cortisol. Cortisol is what's known as our wake-up hormone on a morning, but an unbalanced amount of cortisol in the body is what we know as our stress hormone. So one of the things that I've been covering quite a lot within this session that I've been doing is basically teaching people the importance of sleep, simply because if your cortisol levels and your hormones become imbalanced, what ends up happening is you end up running in a state of fight, flight, or freeze during the day, which then makes any small issue or complaint that comes along, it can sometimes be a little bit heavy and a little bit bigger than what it should be. So I'm going to take you over some ways you can help improve your sleep. And at the end as well, we've got a link which is to know more. What we've developed as a company is a 5-point switch off routine. What it does is it actually helps you get to a deep sleep state. It's on the screen now. I'll cover it in just a second. And it helps you get to a deep sleep state. So a couple of things what you could do to actually help you at this point in time, okay? So as Gemma pointed out, and quite rightly, we're in a state of uncertainty and unusual. And one of the questions that I've been getting asked over and over is, how come it's my sleep that's been affected? Whether that means you're undersleeping or oversleeping. And there is one word that could be put to blame for that, and it's just quite simply uncertainty. It's uncertain times, it's uncertain issues, it's uncertain future, it's uncertainty. So whether you're undersleeping or oversleeping, it's because we are in a state of this not knowing. Now, the best way that you can possibly address this is by focusing on what you do as a person in your day-to-day routine. Sleep is one of the main things you can do as well, because if you do start to fix your sleeping pattern, and this doesn't necessarily mean that you have to sleep for longer, it just means sleeping smarter. If you get some deeper sleep levels and you hit them deeper sleep states, you will wake up feeling a lot more refreshed in the morning. What will then happen in turn is you will start to feel better as your day comes along. You'll start to think more positive, you'll think clearer, and all of a sudden all these little areas will start to fit into feeling better, really. So a couple of things that you could be doing, okay? So I'll just take you over our 5-point switch off routine first. This is just for when you go into bed, okay? So open posture is because we have a mind-body correlation, and if our body's sat quite closed off, our mind will start to overthink reasons why that would be. So if you go to bed on a night, just make sure that you're not taking the stress of the day to bed with you, because if you are, you'll be laid in quite a closed off position. A nice open posture when you sleep will allow your subconscious to switch off. Pillow positions on there is simply pillows underneath the knees if you lie on your back, pillows between the knees if you lie on your side. This is a nervous system aid. It helps aid the nervous system switch off. Breathing techniques, as Gemma said, if you just take 5 deep breaths, this is exactly it, okay? So the breathing techniques that we recommend is called diaphragmatic breathing. It's basically where you take a nice deep breath in and take it all the way down to your lower stomach. This directly starts to relax the body because it starts to alter some of them anxious feelings and negative feelings that we've got in our system. Eye masks used for an evening, especially within the current climate, because if you put an eye mask on and use it as part of your sleep routine, what the eye mask does is it enhances your melatonin levels. Melatonin is the hormone that helps you switch off. The reason why eye masks enhance that level is because it gives you a prolonged period of darkness over both eyes. What this will also do, given the current climate, it signals to your subconscious that that is your time to go to sleep, because at the moment, now we are working from home and in home, there isn't really a work-life balance. And I mean, previous to the COVID-19 pandemic, we were already having a bit of a difficulty making work and home life a difference in two different areas. Now we are even worse with that, okay? So an eye mask is something that becomes quite vital because it really does signal to that mind it's time to switch off. And our counting backwards technique is because if you count backwards, it activates the subconscious. It helps relax you into a deeper sleep state. Now, this is just 5 points in the 5-point signature sleep routine that we've got. What we have got and what's available for you is the whole session on how this sleeping routine works. That's available online, and I'll give you guys the links available for a couple of weeks so you can sit and watch through that, and we'll come to that at the end, I believe. Some of the things that you could be doing, okay, that could actually help the way that you sleep on a night. Now, light, daylight is really vital, okay? So we've got something called a circadian clock within our body. It's what wakes us up in the morning and it's what puts us to sleep on a night. Our circadian clock is altered by daylight and natural light and unnatural light. Now, I understand that some of us are living in flats, some of us are living in houses. Get out or get somewhere near light at least once a day. So we've obviously got our daily exercise. I highly recommend that on a morning, first thing on the morning if you can, or middle of the afternoon if you can, even if it's to take a lunch break to differentiate your day down. The reason being is because of the UVA and UVB rays that are actually present in the daylight and the natural light, even if it's cloudy. They help reset our circadian clock. And our circadian clock, again, is them levels of cortisol and melatonin. So I'd recommend getting out at least once a day. And what you can also do to help improve that is sit near open windows and doors. So if you are restricted and don't have a garden, open a window and sit near some natural light, some fresh air. Again, it's just because our usuals now become unusual and we're kind of getting stifled in our houses or flats and not realizing that that's even having an effect on us. Some of the things that you could do is digital detoxes. If we could just go back to the other side, just so it's got the information on, please. But you could just do some digital detoxes. You could do things like turning off your devices at certain times. This is really good, especially if you are working from home and you do have a lot going on. If you make times and rotas to be online and offline, that works really well. I understand that some of us are quite attached to our devices, so there is something that you could do which actually helps you, which is turn the blue light off. Now, this is on all devices. You can Google it on how to do yours, but basically the blue light emitted by devices actually registers in our brains and it tells our brains that it's daylight. Now, again, previous to the COVID pandemic, we would actually have natural light integrated into some of our days as well, be it walking to cars, be it out on lunches, even just on an evening coming home. Now that we're actually in these four walls and our daylight times are quite restricted with getting out in fresh air, what's ended up happening is these device lights that we are on, as suggested earlier, some of you guys are working 16, 18 hours a day now. Some of these devices are actually affecting and altering our circadian clock. You can change that device light to change to an orange light. I highly recommend it from 6 p.m. till 6 a.m. This is quite simply a set it and forget it thing. You can Google how to do yours. It doesn't change the download or the speed, it just changes the look in the back and it makes it an orange colour. The orange colour doesn't actually change our circadian clocks. If you've got children as well, it's really good for them to help their sleep. You could also get into a routine, okay? So because we are really out of our normal at the moment, something that you could do that would really make a difference is setting a routine, something that would best mimic your actual routine, because although you maybe out of routine now, you will be going back into routine. And the same goes for those if you've even been furloughed, because as much as we are having this time off, the time will go quicker than what we're thinking. It just feels long because we're in it now. You should be looking to set a routine which is getting up at a similar time to your work schedules or your normal work schedules, you know, having your breakfast, dinner, tea at certain times, and still going to bed at certain times as well. Try not to use this as a, oh, well, I can have an extra half an hour sleeping. Still try and set as best a boundary as you can with routine and rotas. What this will directly do as well is help balance that circadian clock, because if you are getting up and going to bed at certain times and the same times each day, your circadian clock will start to balance, meaning by the time we look to come out of the pandemic, there won't be another jolt to the system, which is something that we really don't want to happen, okay? You could also try asking yourself, what is wrong? So for those of you who aren't sleeping, okay, for those of you who are resting, and I'll use the word resting loosely, because what I mean by resting is sleeping and still waking up feeling tired. This is for you guys, okay, and the ones that aren't sleeping. Now, one of the things that's happening at the moment is our subconscious is in overdrive as to what's actually going to happen or going to come at the other end of this. Now, what we're not realizing is, because we are cast into these roles where we are going a million miles an hour on learning, developing, as Gemma said, you know, people are now learning new skills and all these different things. You guys on the end of this webinar, you guys are sat there listening to this thinking, yeah, you know, I've got all of this new information that's downloaded. As we said earlier, I think it was David, with the new laws and legislations and all of this stuff. Well, it's in sleep that your brain categorizes that. So how you learn is on a night when you fall asleep, the brain categorizes and cleans itself from the night before. That is how we learn as humans. That's what sleep's role and function is. It's to categorize your day back into your subconscious. Now, if you guys are downloading all this new information, as well as a whole load of uncertainty as to what's actually going to go on and what it looks like, not to mention the amount of people that are now looking to you for guidance, advice, you maybe given positive messages, negative ones, whatever that's coming about in your role specifically, the direct implication of all them things is your sleep will be out of whack because your mind isn't switching off. And even though you think it may be on a night, again, we now work in the same four walls that we live in. So taking care of how you sleep and how you rest becomes absolutely paramount, because if you start to get a good night's sleep and hit your deeper sleep state, you will naturally wake up feeling more refreshed, meaning that you'll feel just a whole lot different, okay? Now, I do believe that we're about out of time. Is that right, Katie? For me, for questions. So
I was just listening very intently and enjoying it.
I'll leave it there, but what I will just say before we go into the questions is, like I said to Katie and the other people involved, I've got a link that you can come up to afterwards. Katie, do you give that or do I?
The slides will all be available for download from this afternoon. So I think, Emma, your program discussed is going to be available for free for a couple of weeks for people.
Yes, if you'd be interested in actually watching the Seaball session and getting it, just pop me an email along on the purelybalance.co.uk and I'll send you a link that's available. It's going to be available for 4 weeks to you guys, just as a helping hand from me, and it takes you for 45 minutes through the whole sleep routine. And some of the things that we've been getting back are people saying they've never slept as good in 11 years, just a whole load of stuff. So testimonials as well are all available, but just from me to you, okay? So I'll pass you back.
Thank you so much, Emma. Can I ask Jem and David to unmute themselves, so we haven't got the kind of unmute, and we'll move on to questions. We've had quite a few come in, but do keep them coming. First one I'm going to take is from a Soul HR generalist. So she says, I'm feeling more overwhelmed from a tsunami of information. There seems to be more reading, resources and webinars, and it's making me doubt my knowledge, but also feel that I need to read everything and engage with all of the content. What is the best way to keep informed, particularly with all the changes, and also ensuring that we develop professionally? David, can I put that to you first?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I completely empathise and understand it. And I think it's one of those times where everyone is feeling out of their depth. So the first thing to acknowledge is probably it's not just you. Almost, if anyone thinks they're in control of what's happening now, they just haven't understood what's happening yet. Our resources are probably the simplest way of keeping in touch. So we update our coronavirus hub on a regular basis. Any of the major changes will be represented there. So keep in touch with our updates. You don't have to absorb every webinar, every podcast, everything out there, pick the ones that you think might be useful to you and listen to them at a time that isn't going to be overwhelming for you. Understand actually having some gaps and some space will help you to kind of assimilate that knowledge and make sense of it, rather than needing to constantly feed that. And I think they're the key things. The only other thing I'll pull on is just make use of the communities that we have, more so now than ever. So if you are unsure about something, the easiest way of being calm about that is knowing that there is someone that you can call. So the communities, the helplines, the other sources should stop you questioning yourself the entire time, because you know that there's always another source that you can go to go, I'm not sure about that, I'm just going to check with someone. So I think there's some really practical stuff, but just be patient with yourself and kind to yourself at the same time, because there's none of us that can keep up with it. And not only can I empathize with it, I'm feeling that way myself. So I am on trial and things like this today, where I can't say the wrong thing. I've got a team of over 100 people I'm trying to run, and we're trying to do everything that we need to for our members at the same time. It's never been like this before. So we will feel at different times out of our depth or overwhelmed. That's okay. It's what you do about it that probably counts.
Can I put that to you as well, Gemma? And I'm just going to add on to it. Another question I think is connected about overwhelm can be seen as a weakness. So how can we help colleagues to be open and honest about it and normalise it?
First of all, I'd echo everything that David said about being deliberate about where you put your attention. You can't catch everything, and I think there's a particular real challenge with things like social media, that you just don't put your phone down. I know my screen time is up. It's normally pretty high anyway. So I think it's been about deliberate with your sources, and that may be things like turning notifications off. It may be things like only following official news sources for a while, and techniques like that. To the point around it sometimes being seen as a weakness, I completely agree. We know that despite all the great work done in recent years with things like Time to Talk Day and all the mental health awareness, that a lot of people still feel that talking about mental health is a potential weakness. Saying you're overwhelmed is, lots of people say that they wouldn't tell their manager if they were struggling, and those are in kind of normal times. I think as HR professionals, we can to some extent lead by example. I, for example, have been doing almost daily training courses and webinars for my organisation, and I'm trying to personally make a point when I bring that slide up that I showed in my presentation earlier around the potential early impacts and the early research. I've been trying to say, you know, these are the ones that I'm also experiencing, to try and just make it feel that conversation is an okay one to have. Some of this stuff though is organisational specific, because some cultures are really you know, that is much more prevalent, I think, than in other places. So there isn't a simple answer to changing an organisational culture, but I think the only thing we can do is just try and be good role models, and if we're feeling overwhelmed, say so.
Can I just add, obviously the background that I've got is I've worked within all different industries, oil and gas, I've worked in manufacturing, retail, all of them, and one of the main things that's coming through for me personally is everyone is under the same pressure. I'm getting people I've worked for messaging me and going, oh, you know, and I just say, look, sometimes admitting defeat is the easiest way, because what you may fall down in, someone else may be excelling in. So, you know, maybe networking with each other and saying, okay, look, this is, anyone can help with this, because you might then have someone else go, I understand that completely. Oh, do you know anything about this? And you bounce off each other's knowledge, especially just at this point in time. To understand everybody is feeling the same, I think should take a massive pressure off everyone else.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Got a question. I know we've all been talking a lot about people are working incredibly hard and intensely, but we've also touched on HR professionals that might have been furloughed. And this is from an HR professional who's currently on furlough. And they say, while I understand the reason for it, I feel as though I'm not contributing, where many HR professionals are working so hard at the moment. I feel as though I'm being left behind in the profession. Do you have any tips on how to overcome this feeling? David, any thoughts?
Yeah, first of all, absolutely empathise with you, and I know quite a few people have been placed on furlough or indeed have lost their jobs at very short notice. So it becomes a question of what's the best thing that you can do with your time at the moment. And actually, you have the ability to invest in your CPD, to think about actually what you can learn at the moment and make really good use of that time in a very different way. So we've got the 3-day Festival of Work coming out, which is free for members. There's 8 days more CPD that's available on the website, as well as a host of other kind of things that you can do and make good use of your time. So rather than feeling that your skills are dwindling or you're not keeping up, you've got an absolute opportunity to stretch your thinking and your learning into different areas that you might not have had the time available to do before. So I think it's using it and thinking about it as an opportunity rather than anything else. In terms of the skills that your colleagues are picking up during the furlough, I'm hoping we don't have to go through this again. So it might be the kind of lessons that anyone else wants to be learning, to be honest. So there may be some kind of technical challenges that people are kind of getting through, but actually, you know, there are other lessons that you can be picking up that will genuinely give you an advantage when you go back. Because previous, I'm guessing that you had a challenge with not finding enough time to learn and keep your skills or your knowledge up to date. Now you haven't got that excuse, so fill that time with really constructive things where you can.
If I could add something to that, from a wellbeing perspective, you know, I started off by saying in my session that there are lots of different definitions of well-being. Some of them are really closely aligned with sort of achievement, purpose and meaning, and having a real meaning in our lives. And I think when our work is reduced, when we're things like furloughed, there's a knock-on well-being impact there, because that meaning and that purpose has shifted or reduced, and people fundamentally start to question their own value. I think what I would say is, remember that, you know, being furloughed isn't necessarily about you. It's about all sorts of things. Organisations looking to save money and all sorts of things. It's not about you, but I recognise that real challenge that loss of purpose and meaning can bring from a wellbeing perspective. So I think David makes some great points, which is about take this opportunity to learn. You have got perhaps the moment that other people haven't, but there may also be lots of organisations out there at the moment, maybe things like charities, who would love a bit of HR support, some learning and development that could be run online. So, you know, have a look, you know, if it's right for your personal circumstances, have a look at what something like volunteering and using your skills in a different way can give you, because that may help you retain some of that purpose and meaning.
Thank you, Jem. I've got a specific question about sleep for you, Emma. Do you have any advice for people who are finding themselves sleeping too much at the moment?
Yeah, so people sleeping too much. Okay, I'm glad this question came up. It's one that I keep getting written in about, and I've just put this to you guys. Those who are sleeping too much, it's because the sleep that you get in is of poor quality, which is why when you're waking up, you are still feeling tired. So for all of us pre-pandemic who experienced sleeping a whole load of hours and waking up still feeling tired, it's because you aren't hitting your deep sleep states, therefore your sleep isn't productive. Again, back into the 5-point routine, and whoever wrote that question in, please email me so I can send you the link. The 5-point routine that we've got actually puts you into a deeper sleep state earlier, meaning you get a more productive sleep, meaning by the time you wake up you feel better. If you are finding that you're sleeping, it's also a little bit of what Gemma said there. It's also back into that uncertainty and not knowing your role, and whether you've got a role that you're specifically in, or whether it's because of furlough or whatever it is. That sleeping is kind of your body's way of resetting itself and shutting everything out. So what I would recommend is paying more attention to the way that you are sleeping. So again, email me in, I'll give you the link so you can actually get your sleeping back on point and get into a routine. Set your alarm and wake back up. Even if one night you want to go to bed and you are not tired, then still go to bed and still wake up in the morning, even though you haven't actually got work to go to. Don't let that be a factor. Still get up, because what will happen is it'll have a knock-on effect for the following day as well. And it's understanding why you're doing it. Again, if you are oversleeping, it's because the quality of sleep you're getting isn't very good. So pop yourself along. I'll give you that to get you into them deep sleep states. And a bit of mind management as well. I've got a mind management, the Canteen Mind thing we can get you on there as well.
Thank you.
Just a good answer for that.
Thanks, Emma. Got a question from somebody who says, I encourage our managers and staff teams not to respond to emails after hours to ensure they get some downtime, but the CEO continues to email me after hours and expects an immediate response. Do any of you have any advice on how to explain to him that HR can't be a 24-hour service when it's just me and I'm already working longer days? And David, you take that, but we should caveat that obviously, I don't expect you to answer from your own experience, because I'm sure our CEO doesn't do that to you.
I don't know where to go with that one. I think it's I mean, if the question is how do you explain something to a CEO, the starting point for me is always remembering that they're actually a human being. So I think people seem to think that the CEO is some kind of weird office where actually you can't have a conversation with them. I think if you can, and I know it may seem daunting, but explaining to them that is the first step to it, because they've got no chance of filling in that gap if they're not aware of it currently. I think the other thing is not reply. But that can actually create a different kind of expectation or a different dynamic. I think the only thing we can do in these are really unique circumstances is give them a chance to be better. Because it may be that actually they're sending that email, but they're not expecting an immediate response to it. It might just be that actually that's how their working day shifted, or that's how they've always worked. But if you want someone to understand something from your point of view, you have to be bold enough and brave enough to explain it from your point of view. Otherwise, you're asking them to do all of the work and fill in the gaps. And I imagine your CEO's got a host of other challenges and things bobbing about at the moment, which is why they're probably firing different things off at different times, because it's whatever comes to mind for them at that point in time. If they're demanding an instant response from you, that's a different challenge. And that's, again, a conversation about actually the fact that if they want you to be providing a good service, then actually they need to appreciate the circumstances that you're in.
Thank you. Emma, did you want to add something to your hand up? And then I'm going to put a different question to you, Jem.
I was going to say it's something very similar from the experience I've got with people messaging in, which is everything from HR to CEOs. Because I think of the current climate with people not really getting it, sometimes actually setting a boundary between you and them and just saying, look, this is where we're at. I obviously need some downtime too, but what best way would you like it? Would you like me to answer straight away or the next morning? You know, being that kind of go-between, because they're new as well. They might not realise they're putting on you. And that's what I've had a lot of people messaging saying, hey, I didn't even realise I was doing this to my staff. And I'm like, look, you know, it just goes both ways. So I totally agree with David. Just a conversation of how would you like me to respond for future?
Thank you. Somebody's asked. Oh, somebody's got some weird feedback there. I have colleagues and team members who live by themselves. Do you have any advice for people who are alone right now? They might be following a lot of the wellbeing tips, but loneliness is really starting to get to them, and they're currently on furlough.
Yeah, so this is a challenge, and again, I'm going to refer, if I may, to some of the research that came from the University of Manchester, which I'll tweet later for anybody that wants it. And you know, the truth is everybody's experiencing this in a different way. So we're all living through the same situation, but experiencing it and living it very, very differently. So there may be some people who are living on their own and are just fine, and no issues with that whatsoever. We know other people, and not just those living alone, but still with families who are going to crave that contact. And there was a bit of a concern from some of that research that people might actually rush back and break lockdown because they are so desperate for that contact. And that's a challenge that, you know, organisations and indeed policymakers will need to address. So everybody will be experiencing these things differently. I think the only thing that if you are living on your own and you are experiencing these challenges, the thing to do is simply reach out for that connection. And if you know of somebody that is alone, we can't assume they're struggling, we can't assume that they're not okay, but we can ask that question. And I think one of the most important things we can do right now is check in with people and check in with each other. So how are you today? What's going on for you right now? Is there anything I can help you with? Just simple little ways that we can be there for other people. There's no one answer to that, because wellbeing is so individual and personal. So for some, the answer might be what David's already said: fill your time with some great learning and build sort of other connections. For others, it might be on your family Zoom and create loads of, you know, opportunities to have coffee with people online. But for other people, that's the wrong thing. So I don't think there's a single answer to that.
Thank you. Got a question on how to achieve work-life balance when, for many of us, those two things are completely conflated, probably because we're doing them all in the same kind of four walls, and the kind of difference between working at home versus working from home. Is what we're experiencing now more akin to work-life integration? And do we need to recognise it as such and kind of reach a point of acceptance? Or how do we set boundaries between those? Is it even a concept now, work-life balance? Don't know who wants to take that first.
I think to Jen's point, it depends entirely on the individual. It depends on the sector, the circumstances. There's a whole raft of things. There's no, you know, for many people, their working lives and their home lives have been rammed together almost instantly in a way they wouldn't have anticipated, whether that's, you know, and particularly with schools being shut as well, that's had a massive impact on people. I think it's very dangerous to start prognosticating about the long-term impact this will have on the workplace beyond the fact that it's inevitably going to be different. So I think there's so many different use cases and so many different ways actually even the next few months can play out, that I think it's to say that this is, you know, we're now in full work-life integration, that may not even be a healthy way to be. What may happen is that we might need to find different ways of teasing apart in the future, and do that with possibly less flexibility over locations. But it's never just been about the home environment and the work environment. It's not been about that. And it shouldn't be the case that people are now just having to accept that they have to work into the evenings or pretty much indefinite hours, because actually there's an importance to having work boundaried. So it's a really good observation. I just would be very careful of anyone giving you a definite answer at the moment.
I think we need to remember, you know, people keep talking to me about, as David said, what will the future look like? Will we all just work flexibly? Will we all just become remote and home workers? And what I keep saying is, you know, or indeed will our work-life balances change? You know, there is a big difference between those kinds of things, work-life balance in a traditional normal situation and work-life balance in a crisis. You know, when you think about, for example, things like working from home, normally you plan and structure that. You don't go to work one day and go, oh, we're not coming in tomorrow, so take your laptop and anything else you can carry, which was a lot of people's practical experience. So I think we need to be really careful to separate the now and the past and what any possible future might look like. What I would say is, for anybody who is thinking about work-life balance now, or indeed thinks in the future that they need to think differently, FutureLearn have got a great free work-life balance MOOC available at the moment. So if you just want a bit of structure to think about that, it might be a good place to take a look.
And Emma, do you have any thoughts on kind of how you can differentiate your working space from your
just
sleeping
gonna
space?
say, yeah, the differentiating thing. Okay, so just a little bit of psychology here. This is going to sound strange, but it really works. Different clothes, different rooms. So for example, if you're going to go to work, as pointed out, I have my work stuff on right now because I am at work, and come 4 o'clock I'll be taking this off and putting my comfies on. Sounds a little bit daft, but while we're working in our 4 walls, the same with children as well. As I said at the beginning of the session, if you can mimic the life that you were in to as great a degree as you possibly can, obviously you can't change where you're working and how you're working. You could change the room or the area, so you could make a specific place for work, or it could simply come down to items of clothing. So I've been recommending to people that have been messaging me, dressing the children in something for school. It doesn't have to be the school uniform, specifically maybe as a colour. Or you could have maybe a certain top that you wear for work, even if it's comfy and casual and not your normal work attire, something that can tell the mind, okay, this is time for work, and this is now time to not be at work. Again, giving you that actual ability to think, I'm going to reply to them in the morning because right now I'm not at work. And as weird as that sounds, the feedback I've been getting for that is phenomenal. So just give that, it's a tiny tip, really, really useful. Or specific work areas in the house, just don't, as best you can, don't integrate everything together, but clothing is the main thing there.
Thank you. And I'm just going to ask, I'm in charge. I'm just going to ask one more question, and I want really quick answers, and I think it's a really nice one. Can our panelists tell us one thing that they've personally done differently to prioritise their own well-being in the last month? And David, you can also make your other point if you're quick.
Thanks. My other point is that we should, it's never been about where you work, it's been about flexible working, and currently the police can stop you if you're attempting to enter your office and you shouldn't be. So that's an entirely different thing to flexible working, and we need to hold on to that concept. In terms of things I've changed in the last month, I emailed all of my team, so Katie, you'll know this, very early on to say that actually everyone was getting tired out by Zoom. And by Teams and by different calls of that nature. So far more of them are now just making calls to each other rather than having as much screen time as seemed to be enforced by taking what we used to do in the office and just doing it online.
Jen?
Okay, so exercise is a really big part of my life. It's how I maintain my mental health. I will share with people on this call, I cried when the gym shut. I was more upset about that than the schools closing. So for me, I decided to replace that with exercising outdoors every day. So I made myself a promise that I would run or cycle every day. That isn't for everybody. It's a really personal thing. But for me, having that little challenge and a little promise to myself was what I've been doing for my well-being.
And Emma?
And mine is super simple. I take a time out, and that sounds random, but I do either 15, 30 or 45 minutes time out. No phone, no screen, no anything, whether it's a bath, a walk, sitting, or whether I just lay down. I take a time out at some point in the day, usually about 5 o'clock. And it's just me. I just sit with my thoughts.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So I'm afraid that's all we've got time for this afternoon. I'd like to thank the panel for being so great. We got some really lovely comments in the chat, so thank you so much for giving up your time, and thanks all for your questions from the audience as well. A reminder, it's going to be available on demand from this afternoon, and so feel free to share it far and wide with peers and colleagues and watch it again if you want. A reminder that our webinars next week are on people management and reward, and that you can sign up for those now via the CIPD website. And a final reminder about our new wellbeing support for members in the UK and Ireland, with a free 24/7 telephone helpline staffed by qualified therapists and provided by award-winning workplace wellbeing provider Health Assured. And these slides are going to be available to download from this afternoon, so you can find out more about everything there. And I know a lot of you have been asking about Emma's 5-point plan, so you can find that again as well.
Yeah. Just email me in and I'll send you it.
Thank you so much, Emma. So just to say, take care of yourselves, because as everybody said, you can't really care for others if you're not in good form yourself. And we'll leave it there for this afternoon. So thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.
Bye, everyone.